So I'm recording. So good afternoon, Kyle. Thanks for talking with me today about assessment. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Stan. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you again. It's been a little while since we've had a chat, so
It has been a little while.
it's been
Yeah.
good to catch up a little bit, and also good to talk about what kinds of assessment you're doing at DePaul. It seems like you have a range of really interesting things. And so why don't we first talk about your campus, if I can get the page. There you go. So
Mhm.
DePaul University, you're in Chicago. So tell us about DePaul University.
Yeah. So great. Thanks, Stan. DePaul University is the largest Catholic university in the United States. We have around 22,000 students. We're located in the
Mhm.
city of Chicago. The pin on the map there is our historic Lincoln Park campus on the north
Mhm.
side of Chicago. We also have a downtown campus in the loop of Chicago in the high-rise buildings and stuff. Um,
Okay.
and we serve different parts of the university downtown versus in Lincoln Park. The math department's up here with the other science departments, liberal arts,
Mhm.
education, that kind of thing.
Right.
Downtown we got the business school, we've got College of Computing and Digital Media, our law school.
Okay. Good.
So sort of two campus kind of feel to it, which gives it a different kind of feel, but is very much of the city of Chicago. And in the city of Chicago, a lot of our programs are woven into what the city of Chicago does and the resources that the city has. About a third of our undergraduate students live on campus or near campus,
Okay.
and the rest tend to commute. So we have a large commuting population. They might live at
Okay.
home or in the suburbs and come in just a couple of days a week.
Okay. Do they
So
take
that's sort of the
mass
profile
transit?
overall.
Yeah. Okay. Do they take
Yeah.
mass transit commute like that to
Yeah, a lot
campus?
of them do mass transit, or they might drive in, or they'll do like me and they'll drive to a train station near where they live and then take the train from there. So maybe
Mhm.
like a two-pronged commute.
Okay.
So
How many
yeah.
students do you have at DePaul?
Well, overall, we've got, like I said, 20 to 22,000,
Mhm.
and
That's right.
the undergraduates, about 15,000 in total.
Okay.
And yeah, yeah. So in
And
the math department specifically, we don't. One of the things that DePaul University doesn't have is an engineering program. So the scale of our math department is not as big as you might expect with the university with 20,000 students. And we have something on the order of like 200 math majors. We serve many more
okay.
students than that in our, like, a business statistics is a big service course that we run. Our discrete math is a big service course for
Mhm.
the College of Computing. And then of course there's the calculus at
Right.
the lower end of the curriculum. So in a given quarter, we're probably teaching, like in math classes broadly, 2 to 3,000 students at a time in our
Okay.
courses.
Okay. And how big are your classes typically?
Oh, that's a good question. So yeah, one of the things that we did make a commitment to, well, I say we, it was a commitment made before I arrived. I got here in 2009, was to have reasonably small class sizes. And so all of our classes are capped at 40 students max. And you only hit that cap in, like our 100 level classes like calculus,
Okay.
and
Okay.
business stats. Although we have made some pedagogical choices to make even smaller enrollments. Like just this last year, we made our business stats down to 30 because we wanted to do more active engagement in those courses as a
Okay.
structural piece of the course. And to do that, we felt, not to overwhelm instructors, we needed to get it down to a slightly smaller class size. So pretty
Okay.
small classes
So,
on the whole.
okay. So it's driven by pedagogical concerns, just being able
That's
to do
that's
active
right. That's
learning,
right.
et cetera. Right.
Yeah. So the
Okay. And
40,
then
I
do
think,
you,
was just to be manageable. And
yeah,
then anything less than that is a pedagogical choice. Yeah.
for sure. Okay. And then do you have recitations or do you just meet with the
Yeah. So
instructor
we
for all the
we
class
don't, I
meetings?
should have said this before. We have master's programs, and we do have
Mhm.
some of our masters and pure math students who serve as TAs primarily for our calculus and pre-calculus courses. But we don't, and we have what we call a lab associated with those courses and a couple of others. and the lab
Okay.
sections are run by the TAs. So it's sort of like a recitation, but how we use it, well, I mean, that's a work in progress. We're constantly sort of revisiting and trying to hone
Mhm,
what we do
mhm.
there. Currently, the model, I like the term lab because it really does resemble a science lab in that they meet in a different location at a different time of the week, and they have some task that is not directly related to what they're doing in the other days of the week with the professor. Oftentimes they're working with technology, doing something on a computer to produce a lab report even at the end of the day.
Mhm, mhm.
So there's sort of that writing
So,
component that you get in a lab as well.
right. So they get the writing, they get to explore, use
Yeah.
technology, work on problems that don't have nice little answers. Okay,
Yes,
good, good.
exactly. And in our business statistics, this is one thing that we've just done recently is that we have we don't have a separate lab or recitation section for those classes, but they do meet in computer classrooms, and at least one day a week is given over to Excel projects, which is very
Mm,
similar to our calculus labs, but with a different
mm.
context and a different tool. But still, they have this activity that can be done collaboratively with their peers in the room, where they have to explore a little bit using the tools and the
Yeah.
ideas and write a small report, as they go along with their
Okay. Well,
findings.
that sounds great. That sounds great. They're learning something, but also applying it, and they can see the connection, and they're learning skills too that they would use later on. Okay.
We hope
So
so.
yeah, so that's good to see how you've set up your course. So the next part, we've already talked about this, but this is the time to share a snapshot of
Mhm.
DePaul's department. But what we mean here is the different assessment approaches, not so we just talked about the context and how you're teaching, and now we want to talk about what are the different ways people are using assessment and alternative assessments in your department. So let's take a look.
Yeah,
So I'll stop
great.
sharing, and then
Wonderful.
you created
Yeah.
a giant spreadsheet for us.
Yeah. So this is really overwhelming and the details don't matter. For this is more for illustration purposes and then for my own deeper analysis, at a later date.
Yeah.
But I want to say thank you, Stan, first of all, for like the invitation to do this interview was kind of
Yeah.
a nudge for me to collect this data. I mean, this is something that I could have thought of before, and maybe it came into my
Mhm.
brain at one point and left again, but this forced me to be accountable. and so and so I sent out I,
Right.
s- I sent out a call to my faculty last week, and they responded overwhelmingly in such short notice. I got 67 syllabi in just a couple of days, and I spent
And
the last couple of days sort of collecting it. There's no identifying details here other than the course number, so I know what these mean, but it's not tied to any particular person.
mhm,
And,
fantastic.
and then I tried to sort of scrape from it, by looking through what were the highlights that related to assessment, and I was looking for a few different things. Like for one thing, just you see like a typical syllabus, you'll see percentages, some sort of breakdown. How do I give you an A versus an A minus versus a B plus versus a B minus? What are the
Mhm,
different categories of work that are being graded? So anyway, I just collected those from what the instructor put on their syllabus, how they labeled things. So at the top, I just want to point out how many different categories my faculty have for what they're grading. So we start with homework, and then
mhm,
there's midterms up to 3. I never saw more than 3. I should say we're on 10-week quarters, not semesters, if that matters.
mhm.
Then we had something called quizams, which I like that word. I've used it before. It's somewhere between a quiz and an exam. Yeah. So you should take it more seriously than a quiz, but don't stress about it because it's not an exam. It's just a quizam.
It's a quizam, I
Anyway,
see.
it's
That's
a
funny.
quizam. Yeah, my colleague Sarah Bakhtin Conrad introduced me to that term a couple of years ago.
Okay.
It's lovely.
Mm.
But then we also have quizzes, and those can be in class or online. We've got in-class projects, but then we've got out-of-class projects. We've got final exams, participation credit, and then other sorts of things like there's worksheets that are that's just what somebody called it for out of class, and then there's
Mhm,
in-class worksheets, there's in-class presentations, there are portfolios, pre-class work, journals or reflections, final papers, introductory assignments, skill mastery exams, and then lab activities and lab reports. Those are, oh, and then one other, somebody likes to have an extra credit opportunity. So their percentages always add up to more than 100.
Oh, wow.
So,
So I feel like I'm at a buffet right now.
That's right. It's like so many choices. That's
Okay.
right.
And these
but
numbers,
you can see, yeah.
tell us what
so you
these
can
numbers
see,
mean.
That's
Like
right. So we've got the course number on the left, but in a given row, these are just the percentages that the instructor identified, if they identified percentages. In some cases, you see just an X, and that was just sort of a categorical description with sort of a vague implication that some linear combination of these categories was going to be used without specifying what the weights were, which is an approach.
Anyway, that row has all X's, I guess.
Yeah, no, in this class, they just sort of said, I'm going to consider these factors when I decide your grade. Okay. You can do that, apparently. So anyway, I don't want to be judgy at all if I can help it here, but you can see what are some of the common themes, right? Like almost everybody has something for homework. And almost everybody has a midterm, but not everybody. It's not appropriate for all courses. You can see almost everybody's got a final exam, but quizzes, sometimes yes, sometimes no. You can see sometimes there's multiple midterms, sometimes there's only one or only two. And yeah, so you can see just at a glance, like where the common assessment categories are. And anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting. I've highlighted some of these colored bands are common courses. Like these are 4 different sections of the same pre-calculus class. And you can see they're probably working from we do have a department syllabus that instructors are welcome to modify slightly, but we have, it's a strong suggestion that you follow the template. And you can see that there is still variation, but it's minor variation, I think. Some of the takeaways that I got from this that I thought was kind of interesting was that nobody's putting too big a weight on their final exam. I mean, we have one outlier here is somebody with 50% on their final exam, but most of these are down in the 20s and 30s and a couple of 40s. And I think that, sort of reflects what my guesses would have been before collecting this data, that most people in our department aren't going to put more than like a third of the grade all on that final exam. And I think this is not too bad. I mean, fewer high stakes assessments, fewer one-off exams that determines your whole grade. It tends to be better for equity in the long run. So I was kind of happy to see that. And we don't have a policy around this, but it shows that there might be consensus if we wanted to make a policy that say, in any given class that you're not going to have more than a third of the overall grade be determined by the final exam. I think we would have a lot of buy-in pretty immediately on that.
Okay, so I have a question. So if you're teaching 140 or any of these multi-section courses, is your syllabus separate and from, say, someone else teaching the same course? Or how much coordination is there between?
That's a good question.
Classes?
So yeah, so we have several courses that have multiple sections, and we do try to coordinate to the best of our ability. And we do have department syllabi for many, for every class below calculus, and some others as well. But like I said, we part of the culture of DePaul when I arrived, and it's still here, is it's very much let's call it like laissez-faire. Okay, like we hired you because you're a good, capable person, and we're going to trust you to use your judgment. Here's some suggestions, but do what you think is best. And so nobody, even in the coordinated courses where we have a designated course coordinator and a team of a few adjunct faculty, we haven't done, I should say, a lot of like looking over people's shoulders to say like, oh, did you really use the department syllabus that we gave you?
Right.
That's
good.
So
and nevertheless, people are doing very similar things.
Yeah, I mean, we do try to coordinate. We say, we have like for business calculus, for instance, we only have, that's this orange band here, the 137s. We did have, meetings before and after the end of the fall quarter to try to like get all the instructors in a room together, make sure everybody's on the same page. And you can see that these three are very much like each other. This one's a little different. And so that one's somebody who didn't get the memo, I don't know, and decided to, do their own thing, which is, probably not appropriate. And that's something that, maybe we should address. But amongst the ones who sort of did pay attention to what was, being suggested, it seems like it's that we're pretty well aligned. If we had 50 sections at a time instead of 5 or 10 at a time, then this would be something that we'd have to come down a little bit stricter on and just say that there's one master syllabus for all, sort of like Lord of the Rings, one to rule them all. But we don't.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're not quite that. We're not quite at that level.
Okay.
The scale of our situation is a little bit different. We're more bespoke, I guess. Here we're like the tailor on the corner. We're not like the Gap.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Oh, and some of the other things that I looked for and found when I was doing this was some of the what some people might call alternative grading things, or really it's just properties of assessments that that I think, from what I understand, are good for creating an equitable sort of classroom experience for people. Non-discriminatory sort of grading practices, whether there is intentional discrimination or not. And one of those things that I learned about, only relatively recently in my career was the notion of a formative assessment, rather than a summative assessment. So like a final exam where it's, graded, there's 20 questions and it's graded out of 100 points. Like that's a summative thing. You're judging correctness or incorrectness. But a formative thing can be like a daily 1-minute paper that students hand into you on their way out of the classroom. And you're reading it as a way of like getting feedback about their level of understanding, but you're not worried about giving them points for being correct versus incorrect, right? Like you're looking to interrogate like where their thinking is, and you're looking to see that they are engaged meaningfully with the material, and you're going to give them credit for doing it. And it's going to count towards their grade, but it's sort of a binary thing. Like they did it and you're giving them credit for it. And you as the instructor are internalizing, what they're telling you about their learning. It's very useful for running a successful course.
It is.
But it's not
all the time.
It's not something that a lot of PhDs in math learn about when they're getting their PhDs.
It's actually one of the things maybe we need to talk about more. It's formative assessment, because when you figure out where your students are at in class, or over maybe a little bit longer chunks of time, then it changes. It informs what you need to do in class. Right? You can change your strategies. You realize, oh, they're not learning this, or I have these questions that I didn't know that they had questions about, and then you can start to address these things. So fantastic.
Yeah.
So it looks like you have a lot of that going on.
Yeah. So that was one of the things I was keeping an eye out for, and there's a lot of empty blanks in this column, which to me is like, oh, that's a pretty strong signal to me that my faculty maybe need to learn more about this. Right. I don't think that people know about formative assessments and are saying, well, that's stupid and I don't think it's helpful for my class. I think that in the majority of situations here, it's probably that people, it's just never occurred to them that this is a thing you could do. Or maybe it's a thing you can do in an English class, but why would that make sense in a math context, right? That kind of thinking. Yeah. And we can work on that. So this has been really helpful for me. It's something that I can help the other people in my department to learn about and maybe incorporate going forward on a more regular basis. Some other things that I look for was like, how much are students encouraged to or allowed to revise their work and resubmit? I mean, this is another thing that we know from the theory of how people learn things is that it's iterative. You don't usually get something right the first time. And does this assessment scheme allow for that possibility? Or are you incentivizing perfection on the first attempt? Maybe you should allow students to try again. And here we've got a lot more non-empty boxes. A lot of these you can see are just about like our online homework system. And this is one way that I think is kind of like a low-hanging fruit, easy way to incorporate a little bit of this, is if you have a homework system, you can just bake that into the settings. right? And if it's something that's deployed over multiple sections, if everybody's using the same online homework system, well, you just need one administrator to check that box. And now
Yes.
all the classes are doing it, right? So that's an easy one, but there can be a deeper kind of revision, baked in if you have writing assignments and students can revise a homework after it's been, graded by a human. Again, this involves a little bit more work on the part of the instructor. It's a different conversation. But anyway, revisions was another thing that I was looking for. I saw more of it there than I saw the formative assessment. Another thing is specifications grading. So this is like also known as mastery grading sometimes, or standards-based grading, has a few synonyms out there. And this is just a way where you essentially, you identify ahead of time, like what you sort of drill down on learning outcomes for your class. Like, what exactly do I want students to know? And can I articulate to the students ahead of time what that is? Put that in your syllabus. Tell them, this is what I'm looking for. Okay? Like, go do it. If I want you to do this, I'll tell you. Yeah.
Transparency.
And you say exactly what it is. And then you grade their things according to that sort of, it's almost a rubric, or it can even be a rubric. I mean, if you want to do that for every assignment, where it maps directly onto those learning outcomes that you've identified. And one way that some people have used this, my colleague Chris TPSE sort of brought this into our department from his own professional development journey. He uses EMRN as the labels for, sort of excellent, meets expectations, revision needed. I forget what the N stands for, but it's essentially it's like it's like 3, 2, 1, 0, if you want to think of it that way in the grade book. And the idea is that revisions are actually baked into that as well. That if you get an R or an N, it's an expectation. This needs to be revised. And it's not like a scolding. Oh, you didn't do it. You're not smart. You need to revise it. It's like, no, you don't have it yet. I expect you to get it, so do it. It's a very like positive. It can be presented as a very positive thing from the student learning side, and it should be. So that's something that we see in a few of these classes. It's far from widespread. Another thing is it's sort of around late work. Are you flexible with your students, or are you extremely rigid? And that was a very mixed bag for me. I mean, I have some people don't comment on this one way or the other in their syllabi. Some people comment to say, here's my level of flexibility. And some people comment to say, I have zero flexibility. Don't miss any deadlines or you will be punished. Some people try to strike this sort of weird middle ground where they say like, there is no late work, but if you're late, I'll grade it for 85% credit, or some strange thing like that. I don't know. I mean, people have different perspectives on it, and that's one of the things I look for. And then I also had this other category for just like special notes if there was something important that I wanted to remember. Anyway, a lot of data gathering. I haven't fully analyzed this yet, but thanks to Stan again for sort of motivating me to do this. And even at a glance, like there's all this like rich information here that I can really, as a department chair, I can sit with and think about, what direction are we going in from the student side? What would they perceive if this is how things look to them? Because that's the first thing a student, if they look at the syllabus at all, that's what they're looking to right away is like, what's the important thing? How do I optimize my time to get the grade I want? And you can incentivize the good behaviors that you want if you're thoughtful about it. So that's how I see assessment. Should I stop sharing now, Stan? Is this good?
Well, let's leave it up for a bit longer. So I think if we zoom out, one thing to give you some credit here is doing this kind of department survey. It seems like a great strategy because then you can see what your department is doing a lot of and areas that it's not, and then you identified some low-hanging fruit, which would be really easy to implement, and you've already made progress. So I like this approach that you're doing, that you're taking a survey and then seeing what people are doing, and then some people are doing certain things. They can start to have conversations or run a seminar or whatever, and you can start to share ideas. So I think that's great. I think this kind of worked out that you having to meet made you do this, but now you've actually did something creative, which might be helpful. So did you just collect syllabi from people and then you manually went in and typed in all these
Yeah, it was a lot of manual labor. I luckily have a department assistant, so I didn't. I directed I sent out the email, but I directed everybody to send her the files, and she put them in one location for me to find easily.
And then you went
and then I went in. Yeah, that's right. Over the weekend, and it's probably 8 hours of work. I mean, it doesn't take that long because most people put it front and center in their syllabus. Like, here's the grade, percentages, and once you do the first few, like many of the categories get repeated. Although, like I said, there ended up being almost 20 or so categories. And these are just the labels that people used. Anyway.
You could even crowdsource this. You could just have each instructor fill in and add columns and type in.
That's true. Yeah. I was a little bit embarrassed. I mean, I wasn't embarrassed. I was worried that some people would feel embarrassed. Making it visible like this for first attempt. And when I did send out that message to faculty, I made it really clear. I'm not picking on anybody here. I'm not trying to single anybody out. This information's for my eyes only. Before I share it with anybody else, I'm gonna remove any identifying details, right? Like, you here are seeing the course numbers and these other things, but
they're scrubbed.
You don't know who taught what, and you don't see the words that they wrote around these percentages, right? So the individual syllabi are hidden from public view here. And I think
that's a really good point.
Important for people to be forthcoming.
It's a good point that your role was also to filter and keep the anonymity, but still to collect the data in a way that is useful for your department. So this is great.
And I might share this back with them down the road. I'm not sure yet, if it's appropriate for them to see this for their own eyes, this aggregated, form, look, here's what people are doing on the whole. Anyway, it's an interesting project for me.
Absolutely. Okay, so your department wasn't doing all these things 10 years ago. So the next topic is, how did your department get to this point? Who were the people doing this work, or what were the forces that were encouraging folks to change?
Yeah. Should I stop sharing at this point, you think, or were you going to want to come back to it?
Yeah, we can always
come back. We'll come
Why don't
back.
we just chat?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, Stan, you played a role in our department's culture when I invited you to give a colloquium talk here back in, what was that, 2011?
I think so.
Maybe.
It's been a while now.
I came here in 2009, and and I had already met you and worked with you once or twice, and then I think it was starting around 2012 for me. I started working with you more and more regularly through the IBL workshops, and we also had a lot of turnover in our faculty from when I was hired in 2009 to our last tenure track hire in 2017. We probably hired a dozen people, and this is in the department. I didn't say this before, but we have 26 tenure track faculty. Okay, so almost half of the department has been hired since me.
Okay.
All right. So that's pretty significant change, and
that is.
And our hiring mechanisms, our hiring process for tenure track searches, really, and this predated me by a year or two. So the couple of people who came in just before me, and then everybody since me, was hired under the same sort of rough procedures, which really lifted up people who showed signs of being really excellent, thoughtful teachers. Right? Okay. We're not an R1, we're an R2 institution when it comes to research. We don't take it lightly, but we are sort of a mission-driven kind of place, and we are centered on student outcomes here at DePaul. That's a top-down sort of institution-wide feeling. And we hired with that in mind. It was very intentional. Everybody that we brought in, I'm not saying necessarily that the people who retired in that time period weren't like this, but the people who came in definitely had a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm for learning, current best practices in teaching all around. So you had me, who was trained at one of your workshops when I was a postdoc back in 2006. Hiring people with that same sort of mindset about their teaching, that they can always be improving and looking for best ways to engage their students. And several of our faculty, went out to the workshops afterwards. Like Chris, I mentioned,
Chris.
I might have mentioned Sarah Bogdan Conrad
She came
as another
to
one
of the
who
workshops.
went out, and she is now like one of the leaders in sort of the like current IBL world, like in the Midwest. You know,
Mhm.
she's running the Chicagoland Commit group.
That's great.
Which is all about
That's a great way to
driven
get
teaching.
involved. Yeah.
So yeah, so we have some wonderful people, and even the people who didn't necessarily go to those workshops. Emily Barnard's another one; she went to a workshop. Anyway, we got a lot of people who've attended these workshops, but then also they are talking to these other people who maybe themselves didn't go, but because they're open-minded, thoughtful kinds of
Right, and having
people, they're
conversations
willing
with
to
all
learn
of
and try
you.
things. And so there's a lot of, you know, positive sort of peer pressure in that way. Not peer pressure like in a competitive sense, but just like we like to talk to each other about teaching
Mhm.
and share the ideas that we've tried and what's worked and not worked. And so it was very organic the way it grew in our department over the last decade, I think. And what I think I am thinking about going forward, since I've just started, this is my second year as chair, is like, what are ways that we can make this sticky and sort of ingrained in our department? That like anybody who walks in to our department from now forward is gonna like just pick this stuff up immediately, and not have to have the awkward, like, let me try stuff before I hit on the good idea. And when we hire, new adjuncts, can we give them the tools that they can just step in and just do it the DePaul way, whatever that is, how can we institutionalize it?
Somehow institutionalize or standardize, like these are our best practices. These are the things that we've come to agreements on, that we've had experience with, and here, well, that's great. So it seems like a mix of the choices made by upper administration, plus hiring people who think about teaching and it's an important part of their career that they want to do. And then you have a group of people who are working on these things. So then you're learning from each other, sharing and supporting each other. So it feels like a safe place to do these kinds of things. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And I didn't really talk, you mentioned the administration. I didn't really talk too much about that, but we, at DePaul is, in good ways, and sometimes it's not always good. It's sort of can be very like hands off, like try stuff. It's entrepreneurial. That's the way other people at the university sometimes, but we're entrepreneurial. We try things and we see what it works, and sometimes it doesn't work, but we, sometimes it does. And so if somebody comes in here and they say, I want to do something different, then you're given sort of license to do it for a while. And if there's no train wrecks, then nobody's going to stop you.
Right. If it's working, then fine. Yeah.
We were allowed to move in this direction. And then, and what's been actually kind of interesting in the last year and a half, we had a new dean in our college of science and health, and we're actually doing cross-disciplinary stuff. Like we have a new, we call it CSH 101. It's College of Science and Health 101. It's for incoming students to learn student success like stuff. And it's co-taught across, we had a math person, we had a physics person, we had a psychology person, a bio person. Each one of them had like a 2-week module in front of these students to talk about like, what does it mean to do science? And how do you navigate college? And how do you find study groups? And what are the resources on campus? And this kind of thing.
Curriculum.
Yeah, exactly. The hidden curriculum. And also we chose very carefully those instructors to be 3 women and 2 men, 2 people of color.
Good.
2 Latinx folks. So we want to really like get in front of the students as well. Like, who can be a scientist?
That's great.
All these.
And this is their first semester in the.
Yeah. So right now it's just a pilot thing, but I guess what I'm saying, my point here, before I digress too far, is just that that's part of like what is nice about DePaul. Like we have a dean that supports, like with money, right? Because you got to like pay people to develop this course. We had like a summer workshops that we got the team together. We had more than just the people who ended up delivering it, working to try to hash out like what would the curriculum for this course look like? How do we target the students who need it most? and get them in there,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
All right.
And our dean is very, like wants this to work, wants it to, stick and be there for a long time. So we have a lot of support for like moving all of our pedagogy and all the sciences like in a good, sort of inquiry-based active learning kind of direction. And it's across the college. It's not even just, in the math we do it this way, in chem they do it that way.
That's great. So there's institutional support, which you're highlighting is so important.
Absolutely.
For not only, so you can look at it as, can I do IBL or not, but also supporting efforts that go beyond that, right? Get into the hidden curriculum and attending to diversity, equity, inclusion, all these things, but that's all connected. That's all connected.
And I would also say that there's the support for when I went to them and I said, I want to shrink our business stats sections down from 40 to 30. Right? 25% drop. Okay, so if you have the same number of students you're trying to fit them through, that means more section. That means hiring a couple more adjuncts. That's money.
It is money.
They said, if you think that's a good idea, do it.
All right.
And so, I mean, you can imagine a different administrator, different dean or associate dean, whoever you have to ask permission for that kind of thing, saying like, "You crazy?
Yeah, we don't have the
There's
money.
only 40. You should do them 60 person section."
You're right.
That can happen. That can happen. And so I guess I should express the gratitude that I'm at a place where it happened the way it did. That they are supportive.
And you're pointing out that administrative support with actual funding support can be a lever for making bigger changes. And so people have to try to find the different places where you might be able to make changes. Maybe let's talk about something about your role. Your chair, this is your second year. How do you see your role now that you're chair in supporting some of these changes at the department level?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the things that I like about being chair versus just being a member of the faculty, I mean, I love teaching and being in the room with the students, but I can ask these questions and get answers to questions like what's everybody doing in their classrooms much more easily. And then I'm the one who can call the department meeting if that's what's needed, to say, hey, let's think about this. What are we doing and why are we doing it? And should we make some sort of policy shift in this direction or in that direction? And I can help make that happen. So it sort of magnifies the impact of the work that I do, because if I can get us to go from 15 of our faculty doing something to 20 or 24 of them doing it, and that has a big knock-on effect.
That's real change. So that's great to see. You see your role as the chair is that you can support change in some ways, that you can bring people together, you can get people to share ideas. Whereas if you were busy teaching and grading and going to your committee meetings, you don't have the bandwidth or the vision, because you're the one with the spreadsheet now.
Right. For better and for worse.
More spreadsheets in your life as chair as well.
That's true. That's definitely true.
Yeah, well, it's good. It's good that there's some. I feel like the department chairs are important. They're important people in our profession, because you do have that. You're a colleague, so people trust you, right? Because people work with you, but also you have this extra responsibility, and that comes with some opportunities, I think, is ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Do you think of staying on this department level? What are some next steps you see potentially for your department?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in the last couple of years, we've taken more steps to try to be a little bit more coordinated, and that entrepreneurial spirit can get out of control sometimes. If you give everybody complete independence, then that can lead to, let's say, a poor user experience from the student side, right? If they're in so-and-so section for the first quarter of calculus, and then a completely different experience in the second quarter with the different instructor, well, that's not great. So we've tried hard to more clearly define our coordinator roles. We don't have an army of grad students or postdocs that you can just sort of boss around. So it's a little bit trickier to navigate, like, who's in charge, right? And so you have to, when you make a change for a coordinated course to say every section must include the following, that has to be a consensus.
Right.
It's not just a diktat. Like, this is what we do because I say so.
It's better work, that right? Way anyways, is if people agree that it's the right thing, or that here are these best practices, they're working, here are the reasons, and people actually buy into the idea because it's convincing to them, not because some authority said you have to do these. And it's a little bit harder, and I've found, in the short time that we've been trying to make more of this happen, that occasionally you got to compromise, right? You can't be too zealous. If you're somebody who really wants to see dramatic change happen, but you've got to get 8 other people to to come with you, you can push them away if you're too hard on things out of the gate. And so that's why I like collecting that data and like finding recognizing what's already a commonly agreed upon practice, like that's really useful. And we can start from there and then just build it out, right?
A couple of steps at a time.
You have a lot of common ground actually when you look at the spreadsheet there, and that's like an important insight that probably people agree on a lot of things, and you have to find where sort of that, well, like where that zone is where you can make some progress. There's a person in Chicago who lives in Chicago who says progress is good, and you may not be able to get everything you want in the time as fast as you want, but making progress is still a good thing, even if it's not everything that we want or need to see happen, change right away. Because we work with a lot of people, and people have different opinions. So recognizing that is, I think, a healthy thing. All right, so let's say, so maybe the last question would be advice for people who might be interested in getting started into some form of alternative grading. So do you have any advice for either individual instructors or faculty, or perhaps there's a department chair, so we can maybe split this question into 2 pieces?
Sure. Yeah, because I would give different answers. So I think to the individual, I would even split further. Whether you have job security or not can sometimes impact that. Like if you are a tenured person, okay, it's easy for me to give you advice. And the advice is read about things, talk to people, and then try things. Just try things. Right? You're not going to break the people in your class. Like they will be more resilient to, if you switch from doing it the way you've done it for a decade to something that looks very different, the students aren't going to implode. Like it's okay. Try things. And don't be afraid to try things. You don't have to change everything overnight. Pick, a 20% or a 10% change, shift it from here to there. Do more formative assessment. Right? Look for opportunities to give students credit for doing things without judging them, if that makes sense. Like that's sort of a way that resonates with some people. Like if you can do more of that, that's worth trying. Okay, but that's for the people who have job security. If you're a contingent faculty member of some kind, like if you're an adjunct or maybe somebody on a term contract or somebody who's pre-tenure, okay, you need to be a little bit more strategic, I would say. I would suggest, knowing your role in your department, knowing who you can talk to about these kinds of questions in your department, and get advice from the people closest to you about, what are the things that you can try and not try. So that's a very, you got to be a little bit more thoughtful about what you try based on your context.
And you should definitely communicate with your chair and possibly your dean to say, this is what I'm thinking about doing, so that they hear from you first, not from say students or some other faculty person about what you're doing, so that that's right. That's right. Yeah, because students talk, and if they're unhappy for whatever reason, if you try something and a student doesn't appreciate it, whether they're in the right or not, it doesn't matter. You don't want it to be the first time that your chair is hearing about it.
but that, you know, identifying allies in your department before you embark on something that's, you know, new to you is always a good idea, right?
Yeah,
And getting
it's really good advice.
their support. And then what was the other? Oh, and then
The chairs.
what about for chairs and stuff like that? Then, you know, I would say if you don't already know about like the panoply of options when it comes to grading, you should learn, do some reading, talk to some people, go to some meetings, and try to like see a little bit more with, maybe just talk to your faculty too, do a survey like I did. Maybe they know more, maybe you got a lot of internal resources that you didn't already know about. And then you can do some of that sort of, you know, what's working for us, what is aligned with, you know, best practices when it comes to especially equity, and what isn't here, and how can we move the needle, you know, together.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice.
Okay.
Well, I think that's it. So thanks so much, Kyle. I really appreciate the effort you put into this before we even met, and also all the really good insights that you were able to share. Just talking to you makes me think about things on lots of levels, you know, as someone who's as a chair, but also as an individual, and you know how there's advice for different people at different stages. I think that's an important point, to keep that people aren't free, you know, depending on whether you're contingent or if you have tenure. So that's all really fantastic advice. All right, so thanks a lot.
Thanks, Stan.
Yeah,
Great seeing you.
Yeah, good to see you.
All right.